yourselves until I get the intro done, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay, so just to give some context about what we're going to be talking about today, not only is Israel bombing and committing genocide in Gaza, but it's now ramping up its violence against Lebanon. In the past few days, massive Israeli strikes on Lebanon have killed more than 500 people in what has been described as Lebanon's bloodiest days since the 1980s. So over 100,000 people have fled the south of Lebanon as Israel is planning a ground invasion. We have yet to know if that will actually happen or not. This bombing campaign was preceded by a huge terrorist attack whereby Israel remotely detonated thousands of Lebanese pagers, wounding thousands of people, including women and children. And it has also stepped up its missile attacks on Syria, killing dozens at the same time. Israel's intentions are clear because we've heard statements coming out of the Israeli government from people like Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli, who called for the Shia enemy population of South Lebanon to be expelled and announcing a buffer zone to be created on the border. This, of course, is a textbook definition of ethnic cleansing. And then we have here this completely disappointing and, if not dangerous, framing by the pro-Israel, pro-war, bloodthirsty Western corporate media, which has framed this conflict with this, pretext that Hezbollah is the aggressor, firing rockets, and that Israel is acting in self-defense, without the context, of course, that Israel is a settler colony that was created by the United States and Great Britain in historic Palestine, and it has a bloody history of invading, attacking, and occupying not only Palestine, but Lebanon and Syria. Now we have Iraqi resistance groups that have launched drone attacks on Israel's Eilat port. This is, of course, very significant because this is the same port that Ansarullah bankrupted through the Red Sea blockade. And so Israel is taking a lot of hits for this. And it is also rumored that Russia also shot down Israeli drones in southern Syria. We don't know that for sure, but these are the rumors that we're hearing from people on the ground. So to help us break through the fog of war and understand the bigger picture of where Israel's war on Lebanon is headed, we are joined by two guests, both whom I consider my friends and colleagues, Marwa Osman and Batool Subeiti. Marwa is a journalist, university lecturer, and TV host from southern Lebanon. She had to flee her home these past few days from the south because of Israel's recent bombing. Batool is an energy engineer by profession. She's an anti-war activist and political analyst based in the United Kingdom. Thank you, ladies, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure being here, Mnar. Thank you for having us.
Well, it's an honor to have you both right now. And, I wish we could talk about, something more uplifting. But I know that this war has affected you both personally. Both of you are from southern Lebanon. And, I want to start by talking with you, Marwa. You've had to flee your home. You've shared with me that you've had family injured. What exactly is the mood on the ground in Lebanon right now? I mean, we've seen intense Israeli bombardment, killing hundreds of people and injuring more. Tell us, what is the mood right now? Do you feel like people are supporting the resistance even more, or are people disuniting?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us, Mnar, and thank you for shedding light on the massacres that are being committed by Zionist Israel against many people all across Lebanon, not only in the south, but also in the Beqa, and yesterday also in the north as well, in Jbeil and in Kisarwan. The morale on the ground is absolutely inversely proportional to what Zionist Israel is doing and trying to do to the public.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but there is so much feedback coming from your end that we're having a hard time understanding you. Do you have headphones that you can use for this interview?
I can get them. Yes, you can talk to Batool until I get mine.
Okay, if you can mute yourself until that moment. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. We want to hear what's happening, but we can't understand what you're saying because of the feedback. Okay, so Batool, let's actually just, let's go towards you, Batul.
Yeah.
I don't know, or maybe the feedback is coming from you, Batul, because now she's muted and we hear something from you.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Can you hear me? Is it clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So ultimately, this is a price that needs to be paid. And I'm grateful that the Lebanese people are willing to sacrifice. There can be no free Palestine without shedding blood when the entity that you're facing is such a criminal, bloodthirsty, ferocious occupier. I spoke with some of our relatives in Lebanon yesterday, and they shared ultimately how high those spirits are amongst the people. Despite the relentless bombings, you have those who, even in the wake of the Pager terrorist attack, were offering to donate their eyes to those who had lost them. You have Christians who are opening their mosques and opening their homes to the Muslims. The people are chanting on the streets, "This is all for you, Gaza. We fail in comparison to your sacrifices." So no matter ultimately how many F-35 jets are flying overhead, how many missiles are raining, this is a resilience that cannot be destroyed. The homes and the possessions, these are things that, yes, they can be lost, but that ultimately, that determination of treading the path of truth over humiliation is something that cannot be extinguished, nor is any of this new to the resistance or the steadfast people of Lebanon. Dahir was carpet bombed in 2006. We know that today the resistance is 100 times stronger. So blood has that effect of making the resistance stronger and actually rallying the people behind the cause and uniting them. And we know that the resistance has set its goals. It has been achieving them. The people of Lebanon know that. In fact, the world knows that, because unlike the Israeli occupation entity, the Islamic resistance of Lebanon doesn't impose a kind of military censorship on its losses. It's clear that the Israeli occupation entity reigns supreme when it comes to its destructive capabilities, when it comes to its high intel and precision. But despite that, it's not been able to achieve a single one of their strategic military objectives in this war. And the Islamic resistance of Lebanon has been winning. And ultimately, it's the victors of the war that will have a say in the region moving forward. And the people know that. So the people also know that the civilian killings that they are being subjected to will only hasten the attacks against the occupation entity and will bring it closer to collapse and closer to demise. But ultimately, the main point to make over here is that this is a war of morale. The whole objective for the Israeli occupation entity right now is that it's unable to defeat the Islamic resistance of Lebanon. If it wasn't able to do that, 20 years ago, it cannot do that today. So instead, they resort to killing civilians in hopes that the civilians will do the work for them and will pressure the resistance to stop its support for Gaza. But ultimately, that's why they've killed over 600 Lebanese civilians. But the civilians themselves are the ones that stand with Gaza. And you hear that through the sentiments that's ultimately being echoed on the ground.
And Marwa, we're very happy to have you back. Thank you so much, Batool. And I think, we've seen a lot of those videos coming out of the south of Lebanon and even out of Gaza, people standing in solidarity from Palestine to Lebanon, showing their support for resistance and showing their support in standing up to Israeli aggression and occupation. Maybe the feedback is coming from my end, ladies. I don't know. All right. So Marwa, if you can just tell us what the morale is like. I know you've had a very tough week here. You've had to flee your family. Some of them have been injured. Tell us what's the mood like in Lebanon right now, and how people are uniting.
Okay, I hope you hear me better now, ladies. Thanks again, Mnar, for having us and for allowing us to voice the narrative of the natives of this land against the obvious Zionist and Western narrative that has been basically just, it has been like a flood over the past year that is censoring any sort of narrative that comes from the ground. Let me go further back than what happened this week to what happened last week, because last week what happened on Tuesday and Wednesday, September 17 and September 18, was a horrific attack that preceded this barrage of airstrikes on civilians across Lebanon, especially in the south and in the Baqa region. What happened on September 17 was nothing short of a terrorist attack by Zionist Israel, which feels proud that it actually committed such a terrorist attack at such a large scale for the first time maybe in history. Breaching such a security for another sovereign nation. The attack, I'm talking here about the attack of the pagers and what came afterwards, the attack of the walkie-talkies the day after. On those 2 days, on the first day, the first minute, dropped 4,000 injuries and a lot of martyrs down the road. But at the first minute, 4,000 injuries. The second day, it was 800 injuries and a lot of martyrs. We had more martyrs on the second day than we had on the first day. And from those two attacks, we have permanently disabled 1,200 civilians and Hezbollah office workers. These are not combatants. These are members of Hezbollah, yes, but in civilian wardrobe, working in civilian areas. And these are doctors and nurses that were attacked in their work while they were aiding other humans, simply because they had the explosive-ridden devices that Israel was able to ship into Lebanon. Months, even some report by the New York Times says in 2020, the summer of 2022. So even years before Israel decided to detonate them. That was followed by an airstrike on the southern suburbs of Beirut, and that was a whole experience on its own on Friday, Mnar. The rockets whizzed above my building. The only thing that I could feel is I felt that something hit the foundation of the building, and we thought that our building was falling because the stricken building was just 500 meters away from my apartment building. We thought that someone had gone, like an accident happened and someone went through the foundation of the apartment and the apartment was shaking vertically. And then we heard the whizzing of the rockets, but we couldn't tell what it was. We panicked. We decided to just leave. I just had to put a hijab on and we wanted to leave. And then my husband told us to stay put because apparently it was an Israeli airstrike. And during those times, the best thing to do is to stay put, not to run, because we don't know when, where the second rocket will land. So we stayed put, but it was horrible. Up until now, we have entered an all-out war, as you can see. But up until now, people are still being pulled from under the rubble in that specific airstrike, which happened on Friday, which, by the way, has mounted, the death toll has mounted to 53 martyrs, civilians, added to the commander that was assassinated, Ibrahim Aqil, who was the commander of the Radwan forces, alongside 13 other leaders of the Radwan forces, with other civilians, including at least 7 children. So we also passed through that. And when that happened, many people decided to leave the southern suburbs of Beirut. And mind you, this is my Beirut home. I've already been displaced for the past almost 12 months from my actual home in Khiyam, which is on the border with occupied Palestine. And as I was telling you, I don't know if it's still up or not, because just 15 minutes before I went on live with you, ladies, I got a word that the area where my houses got stricken with an airstrike, with a bomb, and we don't know if the house is there or not. And honestly, I don't care anymore, because the number of human losses over the past year surpasses any kind of material loss. We really don't care anymore. Fast forward to what happened starting on Tuesday with the bombardments. We can say it was a bombardment. It was a wave of unimaginable, unprecedented violence on South Lebanon. Horrific. The number of airstrikes that were landing on humans in less than 36 hours, it surpassed 1,200 rounds of airstrikes. Can you imagine the number? Can you imagine the number of tons of TNT and explosives that landed on the hands of entire families that were lost over the past 2 days? because of Zionist Israel, because they are telling their people that they are trying to take out Hezbollah's capabilities, Hezbollah military capabilities. But at the end of the day, Hezbollah, as Batool was saying, is never shies away from announcing their martyrs with their names and photos and even their aliases and where they were born and which village they are from, unlike the Zionist Israeli entities, occupation forces, who hide their casualties. We are proud of our martyrs. And if you look at the numbers, it's relatively similar to the number of martyrs that fall on usual combat days, but the number of civilian losses is immense. The last was, as per the conference made by the health minister, Firas al-Abyad, it has surpassed 600 martyrs. So you can imagine the number of people, and it has surpassed also at least, I think that the last number that I read was 1,500 injured. It might be more because as we speak, there are now new rounds of airstrikes on Baalbek in the Beqa region. So as we speak, people are losing their lives to the Israeli entity genocidal war machine. All of that is uncomparable to the morale of the people on the ground, because I've been in direct contact with the displaced people. I'm displaced myself, but I am very lucky to have good friends everywhere that many people offered to give me their homes. Thankfully, that the Lebanese community came together despite the differences in their political views. They did come together at these very harsh times. And I was lucky enough to have a safe place for my family. But it's the community that you need to look out for. And that's what we've been doing day in and day out. Of course, a lot of work on the media, but on the ground, people needed safe houses, people needed mattresses, people needed food, water. They needed to get to a safe place fast. People needed medical attention, medicine, and whatnot. Every time we talk to these people, every time I get a phone call, it begins with Allah yansur shabab. May Allah, in His mighty capabilities and mighty power, save and protect our men. This is how they start. If you talk to people who have lost their houses, they say, "Fada al-muqawami." Everything for our resistance is okay. We can give more. We can sacrifice more. If you talk to people about their losses, they say, "We've been watching Gaza for the past 11 months and we don't know how to help out. I think we have not lost enough to help out." This is the morale on the ground. Some Westerners might listen to this and think that we're crazy people, but it's not about being mentally unable to surrender. No, it's about visualizing victory, being able to see victory within your own eyes because you trust your resistance, because it is that same resistance that brought us back to begin with. Lebanon was under occupation for 18 years until the resistance liberated the land and made way for the people to go back and rebuild their homes, rebuild their businesses, and live peacefully for decades in that area, especially the area which is north of Litani River. You hear how the people are supporting the resistance and saying words like, as long as our resistance is okay, then we are equally okay. It's fine. We can sacrifice. We can rebuild. If families are lost, they are martyrs. They are in a better place. This is something that Israel doesn't understand, cannot cope with. And I deeply believe that the settlers cannot reciprocate what the Lebanese community provides with its faith, with its resilience, with its support to its resistance. On the contrary, they're not asking Hezbollah to back down. They're asking Hezbollah to use more Qadir missiles.
It's absolutely incredible to hear and see the courage and the resilience of the Lebanese people in the face of Israeli settler colonialism. I think a lot of people watching, of course, people who follow MIT Press are aware and understand that Israel is a settler colony in the Middle East on the land of historic Palestine. But the media does not see it that way. They know that's the case, but to continue to arm and fund this, settler project, the media continues to flip the narrative. And so, Batool, I'm curious to know, Israeli officials have claimed that these attacks are part of a strategy of escalation through de-escalation, meaning that only by amplifying these attacks can they achieve peace. This line of reasoning seems obviously nonsensical. What is the point of all of this for the Israeli government? What is it hoping to achieve here?
Absolutely. The Israeli occupation entity, I think first is it's important to clarify that it's not a monolith. So there are sheer and utter contradictions within those top decision makers themselves. So for example, you have the camp of Lapid to Benny Gantz to Gallant to Netanyahu to Ben Gvir to Smotrich. You have the likes of, Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, who have actually been calling for a ceasefire and echoing the American strategy. And that is one of ultimately de-escalating. This was for all the months that were passing. And that's for one reason and only, not because they're not genocidal and not because they don't want to wipe Palestinians off the face of this earth, but ultimately because they don't see it within the Israeli occupation entity's own interests to continue a war that is failing. And they know that a war is not won by the capability to cause mass destruction, which is all that we've seen. It's won by not allowing your enemy to achieve their goals. And so now, if we look back to what those goals are, we know that the Israeli occupation entity aimed to do two things since the start of this genocidal onslaught. It put down as its aim, number one, to dismantle the Gazan resistance. Number two, to recapture the hostages through war. Number three, to divide Gaza and the Lebanese fronts. And this is quite important for them to do, because ultimately the reason that it is not able to defeat, one of the strong reasons why it's not able to defeat the Gazan resistance on the ground is because they've had to station their elite military battalions in the northern front. They've had to station them there because obviously the Islamic resistance of Lebanon in the northern front is quite strong and sophisticated. And so that unity of the fronts is a big threat to them, because imagine if they didn't have to deal with the northern front. They would have stationed all of their troops and all of their capabilities and capacities would have focused on Gaza, ultimately, which would be their ideal scenario. They would defeat the Gazan resistance, and then their strategy would be to go towards the northern front and then deal a decisive blow towards the Islamic resistance of Lebanon, and then churn it out into this regional war. That's the way that the Israeli occupation entity would ideally plan it. But it's the unity of the fronts that has enabled them to not defeat either one of the resistances. And that's according to the Israeli occupation entity's analysis, obviously. But we know, since 2005, right? That's when the Israeli occupation entity had to unilaterally withdraw from Gaza. The reason it had to unilaterally withdraw from Gaza in the wake of the Second Intifada is because they couldn't withstand the resistance attacks back then. How about now when it's a lot more sophisticated? Or if we're talking about the Islamic resistance of Lebanon, they failed in their objectives to dismantle the resistance in 2006. How is that possible today? So ultimately, to divide the Gazan and the Lebanese fronts was one of their core objectives, which again, they failed in. And number four, to relocate the settlers in the north. So to offset the effect that the Islamic resistance of Lebanon has had in the north. So all of these aims have ended in failure. The Islamic resistance of Lebanon, on the other hand, it aimed to, number one, act as a supporting front in exerting pressure to halt the war in Gaza. That's the main key objective of why the Islamic resistance of Lebanon keeps striking key sensitive targets of the Israeli occupation entity, and that was mainly on the borders, so targeting its intelligence, its radar, its air defense systems to essentially shut the eyes of the occupation entity and its military so that they are able to strike other more sensitive strategic locations as a retaliatory measure to both the occupation entity strikes on Lebanon and also coming to defense of Gaza, of course. So the Islamic resistance of Lebanon has succeeded in that objective. And number two, it also, one of its key objectives is to prevent the Israeli occupation entity from achieving its goals of defeating the Gazan resistance. And today, the Gazan resistance stands strong. The reason it is standing strong, of course, is because of the high morale that we see from these resistance fighters on the ground. We've seen them come at zero distance from the Merkava tanks. This is in stark contrast with the Israeli occupation entity that has displayed its soldiers have displayed zero morale. They've entered Gaza and it's like they don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they're going. They're constantly monitoring, scared that they're going to fall into ambush, scared that they're going to be booby-trapped, essentially. They're afraid to go into the tunnels. So it's exactly as Marwa said, that settler society, the soldiers are a reflection of the Israeli occupation entity at large. That is a society of luxury. It's not a society of war. It cannot withstand war. And so we've seen that the Islamic resistance of Lebanon has succeeded in all of its goals. The Israeli occupation entity has failed in all of its goals. And it is precisely because of this reason that you have, for example, America, that for all these months has been trying to push for a ceasefire, has been saying, okay, well, we've given you all of the arms of the world. We've given you all of the ammunition of the world to just do something on the ground, just defeat the Ghazni resistance, achieve one strategic military objective, at least figure out how the tunnel networks are functioning, at least locate Yahya Sinwar, Muhammad Daf, achieve something which you can come out of this war stronger. But in actual fact, what's been happening is as time has been going on, the Israeli occupation entity has been falling into a greater pit hole. And that's why if you analyze the speeches or the words of the top Israeli military analysts, like the head of the major general of the reserve army, Yitzhak Brik, when he says that if this war continues at the rate that it is continuing, the Israeli occupation entity doesn't even have 2 years left. The reason it doesn't have 2 years left is because all of the components for a country that makes it capable of surviving are deteriorating. We've described the military front and how they do not have the morale on the ground, how even when it comes to ammunition and tanks and spare parts, they're running out because ultimately all it's done is the capability of mass destruction. That's all it's demonstrated. You mentioned in the beginning, Mnar, about the striking of Eilat port and Eilat becoming bankrupt. Today, we're seeing the Haifa port also sustaining, attacks. That's where the majority of Israeli imports and exports happens. It's either through these ports or it's through land from Egypt or through Jordan. So we know that also in a state of risk, an economy cannot thrive if there is that risk factor. You have companies that won't want to invest anymore. We know that the Israeli occupation entity with time is becoming a pariah in the global sense, which means that companies will start thinking, if we deal with this entity, we're going to be blacklisted. We're going to be boycotted. And we know that politics runs on power and ability. No one respects a failing entity, and the whole kind of contract, the whole relationship of America with the Israeli occupation entity, it's like, we are funding you. We are giving you the oxygen to breathe for you to fulfill our interests. And that is for you to act as a functional role for our interests in this region. Israel, you need to protect us. Now our job is to protect you from all of these resistance attacks that are coming from left, right, center. And if this blows out into a regional war, then all of our own military assets in the region are in jeopardy. But then it begs the question of why is America not pressurizing the Israeli occupation entity to then de-escalate? And this is another important point. And we have to see this within the context of also, the American elections that are going on and how it's difficult for America to take strong and decisive decisions. Netanyahu has more room to maneuver. And also more crucially, anything that weakens the Israeli occupation entity. So for example, if America decided to suspend its arms or to put Netanyahu on the terrorist list or Ben Gvir or Smotrich, which it can easily do. America has 101 cards that it can use against the Israeli occupation entity. What that would do is it would weaken Israel at the expense of what? At the expense of a stronger resistance. So the point is right now, during a time of war, America in some respects has to walk with the Israeli occupation entity's strategy. It has to walk with its blindness and its dumbness because it's in an emergency. It's like the house is burning, the house is on fire. You can't deal with the dirt that's in the house. Like Netanyahu signifies the dirt in the house. They'll deal with the dirt later on. Accountability for Israel's failures will happen post-war. And I do believe that accountability will happen because the Israeli occupation entity, not because it's been indiscriminately killing civilians, but because it has failed to defeat the Ghazni resistance. It has failed to do the thing that it was created for. So to go back to the primary question, why is the Israeli occupation entity ultimately ramping up its efforts? Because it has reached the point where it's like, 1 year in, we've not defeated the Ghazni resistance. The reason in their assessment, they decided to put all of their offensive efforts on Gaza since the start of the war is because they considered Gaza the easier front to defeat. It's like, oh, you know, this is like a walk in the park compared to the Islamic resistance of Lebanon. But then when the northern front has been bleeding them and has gotten involved, they were forced, as I mentioned, to place their elite battalions there to confront them. And now they haven't achieved either. So in their assessment now, in their delusion, of course, they're thinking if they can focus the majority of their efforts in the north, on the Lebanese front, they hope they can pressure the resistance enough to reduce its support for Gaza, so then they can come back to Gaza and refocus all of their efforts in Gaza. But we know here is where the psychological war against Lebanon is so important for them. They're not going to be able to defeat the Lebanese resistance because they don't even know where their launchers were. You know, in the wake of when they were doing the preemptive strikes, you know, as they were anticipating the Unit 8200 attack, they attacked, you know, ground that was empty. They didn't even know where the Islamic resistance of Lebanon's launchers were. They didn't strike a single launcher that affected its capability to fire the missiles, essentially. So it has no idea in that sense. All it can really do is targeted, precise strikes at Lebanese commanders because their intelligence is strong and because they have a strong network of agents that can, for example, locate where the leaders of the resistance are. And they have the really accurate missiles and drones to target at that specific point. That is their strong point, yes, but despite that, it's not achieved a single strategic military objective on the ground. And here, the psychological war against Lebanon is so important. If they can strike the Lebanese civilians enough, they hope that the Lebanese people will not show morale and will start blaming the Lebanese resistance for turning Lebanon into Gaza. But as we've been discussing, the complete opposite of that is happening. So whatever way you look at it, Mnar and Marwa, it's a lose-lose situation for the Israeli occupation entity, and they're only hastening their demise because the resistance targets and their bank of targets have only expanded, and the rules of engagement have expanded in a way in which the resistance is achieving its goals even further. The only price that's being paid over here is the hefty price of the pure blood that's being shed. But of course, as we know, this pure blood is not an ordinary blood, and it's not going in vain, because liberation cannot come about, as I mentioned, except without blood being given on the ground, because we're dealing with such a ferocious occupation entity.
And I think people need to remember that this is resistance to Israeli occupation and settler colonialism in the region. And the people of Lebanon, the leaders of Hezbollah, have shown their solidarity and unity with the Palestinian people, taking this cause upon themselves, because not only are they defending Palestine, but Hezbollah is defending the south of Lebanon. I mean, we know that if Hezbollah did not exist, southern Lebanon probably would have been taken by Israel a long time ago. And in fact, maybe the Lebanon that we know today wouldn't even exist as well. And I'm so sorry to everybody for my feedback. I tried to fix it. It didn't work. So I was going to just read off something. So hopefully I won't have too much feedback. All right, so I want to talk more about the ports, or not the ports, the ports, yes, but I want to talk more about the statement that has come out of the Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he specifically called for the Shia enemy population of South Lebanon to be expelled. And so it's very clear that Israel has named the enemy to be the Shia enemy population. And I find this to be very interesting, because if we look at the neighboring Arab countries, why hasn't Israel declared Egypt an enemy state, or enemy population, or Jordan, or Saudi Arabia, or the UAE, or Morocco, or Turkey? Because many of these countries are working directly with the state of Israel to aid them in the genocide, literally. And so today we know that 5 miles of aid trucks are lined up at the Rafah border, and Sisi could open up that border, but he won't. Instead, Egypt has dedicated 5 ports off of the coast of the Mediterranean Sea for cargo ships to supply Israel through the Ashdod port. And right now, Egypt is supplying Israel with $331 million worth of exports. And that's 3 times more the amount than it was in 2021. And the reason I wanted to mention these things is because a lot of Palestinians and people around the world are confused as to why, only Lebanon, or only Hezbollah in the region, not the only, but the closest to Palestine, are helping Palestine and Gaza. What are all the other countries up to? Well, because thanks to the Abraham Accords, they are working with the state of Israel. Because of the Red Sea blockade that has bankrupted the Eilat port and is working to bankrupt other ports where Israel is shipping out and receiving exports and imports, Israel-linked cargo ships are arriving in the UAE to unload their goods. Trucks then transport these goods through the UAE and Saudi highways to Jordan. They eventually reach Israel via the Jordan River crossing. And then we also know that during the Arab Summit in Riyadh, the Access Assistance, which are the countries of Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Morocco, and Jordan, all voted against the oil embargo against Israel. And they voted against limiting U.S. airspace for Washington to ship weapons to Israel. Now, I have a lot more to say, but I'm concerned about my audio echoing here. So I'm going to stop there and just take this to Marwa. Were you guys able to understand what I said?
Yes.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, go ahead, Marwa. Tell me your reaction to this statement about the Shia population being the enemy, while all of these Arab neighbors are basically in bed with Israel, assisting in the genocide.
Yeah. Well, it's been 1 year of genocide on Gaza, and the enemy was supposedly the Sunni population of Gaza. Now, it's suddenly the enemy, the Shia population of South Lebanon. And believe me, if Egypt, for some miraculous reason, creates its own resistance factions, Israeli entities' primary enemy in Egypt will be the Fatimiyun of Egypt. And if the Jordanians decide to resist, it will be the Muslim Brotherhood of the Jordanians. Similar to how, for example, the Alawites are the main supposedly enemies of Israel in Syria, despite the fact that the Syrian Arab army is a majority of Sunnis. But they know how to use those sectarian differences to incite hatred amongst the Arab populations. But what they have been doing over the past year broke literally more than 30 years of paid propaganda, 30 years of inciting terrorism against the same nation, Arabic-speaking Muslim nation in the so-called Middle East, in West Asia, and in Greater Arabia as well. It all just crumbled when they started killing with impunity the babies of Gaza, the women of Gaza, destroying Gaza. To rebuild Gaza, you need at least 15 to 18 years to rebuild what was there before October 7. When you look at it, when you look at the vast amount of destruction, and Gaza is just 360, I think it's 362 square kilometers, which is like nothing if you compare it in size to the West Bank or even to South Lebanon for that matter. And yet they were able to continue the bombardment campaign against the people of Gaza in a way that even their own allies at one point said, whoa, stop. We are talking about certain political officials or governmental officials in France, for example, or in Italy or in Spain that were voicing their concern and their dismay, if you will, at this ongoing genocidal campaign. So it's only normal that Israel names Shias as their main enemies and targets, despite the fact that all of Lebanon at the moment is in solidarity with the people of South Lebanon and of Beqa, trying to help out and calling on the resistance to protect Lebanese sovereignty. Now, something very important you mentioned, Mnar, was the help, the economic and logistical help that Zionist Israel has been receiving from countries like Egypt and Jordan. You know, the Jordanian king was flexing his muscles on board that plane with throwing food, killing more Palestinians when he threw food at them from airplanes to show that he is helping break that siege, when in fact the plane did not even fly over Gaza and the food were not allowed to be thrown to the people of Gaza until the plane landed in one of the Israeli airports and it was checked. Like even the smallest screw on board of that plane was checked and double checked by the Israeli entity. How shameful it was to see that happening on live TV. Also, you have the shameful act of the Egyptian government and its president in not allowing aid to pass into Gaza. If you look at the reports from the from the UNRWA and the UNHCR, talking about the lines and lines of convoys where food is going bad and rotten on while waiting for it to enter. And if you look at the route, if you think that if they open the Rafah border, the trucks would just enter, no. The trucks are being obliged to drive from the Rafah border all the way to the eastern border between Gaza and occupied Palestine, near Ashkelon, and then there they have to be checked, and then they have to go into the Netzarim junction, and then either go up north or go down south. You know how much time that route takes? 61 days. So that's 61 days plus the months of standing in that convoy of aid on the Rafah border. So we're talking about more than 3 to 4 months for an aid truck. If you want to send an aid truck, let's say you are a group of activists in the UK and you decide to help out Gaza, you send an aid convoy today. They will receive it 4 months from now if it ever goes through and if the food doesn't go bad. This is how things are being operated on the borders of Gaza. So this is the definition of a genocide. You're not only bombing them, annihilating them, destroying their cities, destroying every aspect of life, anything that would give them the necessities of life to sustain a good, respectful, dignifying life with clean water, with food, with sanitation, with medication, with housing and schooling. You're also denying them food and aid. That's the deliberate starvation of a population of 1.9 million displaced at the moment, despite the fact that it's 2.3 million in Gaza, but it's 1.9 who are continuously displaced. 90% of the population in Gaza has been displaced 10 times in a row over the past year. So, and these are all numbers according to the UNRWA report, the latest report that was issued on Wednesday, September 18. And I actually had a chunk of that on my show last week on Expose. So that is just simple statistics of how Zionist Israel operates when it fights the people that it wants to uproot from their land, to steal their land, and it doesn't really care if she throws them in the nearest sea or the nearest desert, or just opens up craters with 2,000-pound bombs for them to be buried under the desert sand. What Israel wants is to kill with impunity anywhere, everywhere, while everyone else just shuts their eyes, shuts their mouth, and says Israel has the right to defend itself, when in reality, Israel does not even have the right to exist.
So I just want to make sure you guys can hear me now.
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up. All right. I just MacGyvered my way back in with new headphones and a different mic. So there's no feedback this time, right?
Sorry to say there is feedback.
Oh no. Okay. I don't know what to say anymore.
It's not as hard there.
I'm not quite sure. Let's see here. I really want to fix this because I did have some things that I want to. Oh, here we go. This is why. Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
That's amazing. Yeah.
No feedback?
No.
Okay. All right. So I just want to piggyback on what Marwa was saying about some, and I kind of missed, I'm so sorry, some of the things that you said because I was unplugging and plugging my microphone. But I did want to talk about a couple of countries here, and I apologize if this is repetitive. Marwa may have mentioned some of these. But we do know that 40% of Israel's energy needs right now run through a pipeline from Azerbaijan through Turkey to Israel. And so Erdogan announced a halt to trade with Israel this last year, but in 2022, trading between Israel and Turkey has reached $9 billion annually. And so with this 40% of Israel's energy needs that runs through this pipeline from Azerbaijan through Turkey, that means that Turkey has the power to cut that pipeline off. But Erdogan won't. He does give a lot of strong words of condemnation for Israel's actions in Gaza. He does give a lot of words of solidarity with the people of Gaza, and then also with the Hamas resistance group as well. But I think that actions at this point speak louder than words, because we have a literal genocide happening. And so we also know that thanks to the Abraham Accords, the Saudi Arabian backed group named Affinity Partners owns a stake in the Israeli company Shlomo Group. Guys, I hear feedback. Is that from me still?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I give up on this. But let me just finish
No
this last thing. So the Saudi-backed group Affinity Partners owns a stake in the Israeli company Shlomo Group. During the conflict in Gaza, the Shlomo Group contributed trucks and military equipment to the Israeli military's Shaldag and Maglan units, as well as food packages for the IDF. So I'm going to pause there again. I think I have one other thing that I need to unplug. So Batool, let's go back to you, Batool, to talk about, I want to kind of give us a more broad perspective about what's happening with the Iraqi resistance and Yemeni resistance in response to Israel's genocide in Gaza. The Iraqi resistance groups has launched attacks on Eilat in southern Israel. Can we expect more involvement from these forces now that things have escalated with Hezbollah?
I definitely do think so, yes. I think we're going to see the supporting fronts expand. Essentially, the way that it works is the closest front gets involved, and then the closest, and then the closest, depending on how much need and necessity there is for it to get involved at a particular moment in time. So when the war was raging in Gaza, the primary front of support, of course, was the Islamic resistance of Lebanon. And then secondary to that, of course, you had the Iraqi resistance that was periodically flying its drones into the occupation entity and its missiles, but was primarily targeting American bases as well, Ain al-Assad specifically, to get it to a point where ultimately it's dysfunctional. You know, the amount of times you're attacking it is greater than you're able to replenish it and to repair it, to then apply pressure on the United States of America. So right now, because this war, of course, has expanded, and we're seeing that the rules of engagement themselves have expanded, to exclude the heart of the Israeli occupation entity. We've only so far seen one strike on Tel Aviv, which was the one yesterday that hit the Mossad HQ. And we're seeing that, of course, with Dahia, you know, Dahia in Beirut has been attacked several times, but it's not at the level where it's, you know, completely indiscriminate like the rest of Lebanon, where it's just dropping on civilians left, right, center. It's still more targeted in the Dahia. But currently we're seeing that the rules of engagement is that all areas up to Haifa in the occupation entity are up for targets in an open account fashion by the Islamic resistance of Lebanon. And likewise, all areas in Lebanon, excluding Beirut, are being attacked indiscriminately. So that means, you know, all the civilians themselves are primarily the targets. And so I believe that this situation, this status quo, will likely continue from now, at least until the American elections are over. And I believe at the same time, we are going to see ramped up efforts from, and we've already seen that as you've described. There have been several drones so far in this week that have been fired by the Islamic resistance in Iraq. So the one that hit not just Eilat, but there was one in the Jordan Valley that hit an Israeli military base that was also successful, and that was on fire, and that footage can be seen online. And I do believe that Yemen, it's also expected that Yemen will also become more effective. I think we'll see a preparation for more special efforts and operations as well, more targeted, whether it's from the sea, whether it's on the ground, or whether it's even, you know, the Islamic resistance of Lebanon launching an offensive in areas inside the Israeli occupation entity. I think that's also a possibility. And I do think that there will be preparation also for a potential ground offensive I'm not of the opinion that that would happen now, because the Islamic Resistance of Lebanon actually wishes for them to ground invade and to face them rather than to have them target civilians from the sky. That way it will become a big trap for them, for the occupation forces in that case. And they can target them much more easily and they can harm them much more greatly on the ground. And I mean, theoretically, the Israeli occupation entity, soldiers can go beyond the borders that are demarcated. But no, I don't think that's going to happen soon. But bear in mind that also the resistance can do the same. So they can go into the Galilee area.
Can I mention something about this idea of ground invasions really quick? Just a comment about this. When Israel kept announcing it's doing a ground invasion in Gaza, I mean, it's all big talk. It's big talk. The second they entered Gaza, we saw all of the videos coming out from Hamas showing just how they were targeting these Israeli soldiers in ease. And the same thing in terms of like southern Lebanon. We keep hearing Israel talk about the ground invasion, but we all know that the Israeli military is incapable of dealing with Hezbollah from the ground. Do you agree with that?
Yes,
we are
absolutely.
yearning for it. We are yearning for it. You have no idea. People are displaced, far away, little to no food, sometimes no mattresses to sleep on. We heard on the news that yesterday the Zionist cabinet gave a green light for an invasion. We've been waiting. I swear to God, this morning at 5 a.m. I woke up for the Salat, and I was reading on the WhatsApp group that there was some sort of an infiltration into Zionist Israel, and people were celebrating. And apparently, like 2 hours later, the Israeli entity military releases a statement saying that it was, I'm sorry to say, 3 wild boars that entered the areas, and they initiated all sorts of panic amongst the Zionist enemy. We promised you to see something unprecedented if Zionist Israel decides to invade the southern part of Lebanon. You will see, for the first time since 1948, liberated Palestinian land. And I swear to you, on my life.
I just want to mention something quickly, Mnar, from the enemy's media, so from the Israeli occupation entities media. I think it was Yedioth Ahronoth, in which they actually said this very recently. I think it was yesterday or today. They said that the Israeli occupation entity's behavior is similar to its behavior at the beginning of the 2006 war, when it believed it would defeat the Islamic Resistance of Lebanon through air power and without a ground invasion. When the air power failed, they couldn't defeat the morale of the people. Then the Islamic Resistance of Lebanon continued to fire onto cities and towns in the Israeli occupation entity, which is exactly what we're seeing today. Then Israel was forced to invade Lebanon on the ground, and this invasion did not achieve any single one of its goals. Just remind people, this is 2006. We're talking about 18 years ago. According to every top analyst, strategist, anyone you ask, the Islamic Resistance of Lebanon today is 100 times stronger than it was in 2006. Now, if they weren't able to achieve those goals in 2006, how are they able to achieve it today? And it's exactly as you said, Mnar, also, if they couldn't recapture 362 square kilometers in Gaza, and if they weren't able to ground invade and achieve their objectives in the weakest front of the whole resistance axis, the weakest link, you could argue, is Gaza and the West Bank. If they weren't able to secure it there, how on earth would they be able to secure it in South Lebanon? So I do think it's sound bombs. I think it's sound bombs to kind of provide some reassurance for its very rattled settlers. As we know, hundreds and thousands of them are fleeing to bomb shelters, especially in areas like Haifa. But unless they're asking for suicide, I don't know. But they've proven that they are. So that's another question mark that I put. But really, it's against their interests. I think that's the main point.
And I want to move on to talk a little bit about Syria now, because, people are talking a lot about what's happening in Lebanon. But if people didn't know, Israel has basically been bombing Syria for years. And they were bombing Syria at the same time that Israel was bombing South Lebanon. They bombed several targets in the heart of the country. However, reports are believed. Hold on a second. hold on, let me get my question together. It is believed that Russia reportedly shot down 13 missiles heading towards Tartus, where a Russian military base is located. I don't know if I pronounced that city name correctly. What could Russia's role in all of this be? I mean, are we seeing like a new, new strategy from Russia to take kind of a more hardened approach when it comes to Israel in the region? Batool, what do you think about this?
Of course, entities, I think, like Russia and China, they are the type to kind of introspect and look at the status quo and see how it's developing in front of them. And of course, for them, they care about strengthening and consolidating their power, not just regionally, but we're talking about an international sense. I mean, they're working towards creating a unipolar world. In that unipolar world, the Israeli occupation entity has no place whatsoever. And they're very much aware of that. And they understand that. And they're seeing the shift in the power balance on the ground. And I don't think any powerful entity will side with a weak entity, and that's what we're seeing unfold before us. The Israeli occupation entity, in the real sense, has become a pariah in the global sense. So I think even post-war, this is of my opinion, post-war, even America itself will have to think of substitutes for the Israeli occupation entity. It will have to shrink it to match its true size, because we know that politics runs on power and ability, and the weak has no place in the dirty world of politics. So, of course, entities like Russia and China, they are the beneficiaries in this situation, where ultimately there is a power vacuum that gets created when the Israeli occupation entity is weak, when American presence in the region is weak, and that is an opportunity for them to consolidate themselves more regionally. And the people of the region actually welcome this because they've seen goodwill from Russia and China. So when you talk about, Russia's role, for example, it was Russia's participation in the Syrian war by providing the air capabilities, and it was the Islamic resistance of Lebanon on the ground that prevented the black flags of ISIS from reigning. Whether people like it or not, the head-chopping caliphate was not able to reign because of Russia and the Islamic resistance of Lebanon and Iran's critical and crucial support during that war. So, of course, an entity like Russia will, at the end of the day, think what is conducive to its interests. But there's an alliance right now that is happening in the global sense, where when we're talking about BRICS, we're talking about entities that are sick and tired of unilateral American transgressions and hegemony that are forming. And that circle is only widening and getting bigger and getting stronger. And Russia and China are entities that sit at the helm of that. So, of course, Russia in this situation is looking at the situation and is, that's ultimately to the advantage of the formation of this multipolar world. That's to the benefit of everyone.
And Marwa, I actually met Marwa while I was covering the war in Syria. So I don't know, Marwa, if you remember that. You're one of the best journalists that were coming out of the region to cover the US-backed insurgency, I guess you could say, the Western and Saudi-backed insurgency in Syria. And so when you see what's happening in Syria now with Israel escalating, I mean, what is the bigger picture here? What are Israel's goals?
Well, Israel's most major goal in this specific round is to make sure that the Syrian Arab army does not get involved to try and take advantage of the situation and try to liberate the occupied Golan Heights, or at least allow its allies to use the front in the occupied Golan Heights to launch strikes and launch a war against Zionist Israel in support of Lebanon. So Lebanon opened the front to support Gaza. We might see a new front being opened in support of Lebanon and Gaza from the Syrian side, not necessarily by the Arab army, by the Syrian Arab army. It could be by the resistance factions that were born throughout the global war on Syria over the past 13 to 14 years, because there has been national defense forces that were trained by the by resistance forces and by the Syrian Arab army itself, that are taking control of certain situations in certain areas, especially those areas that were taken by ISIS, by Nusra in Aleppo, by ISIS in Tadmur, and in the eastern part of the Euphrates. We saw a lot, especially over the past 3 months, where certain Arab tribes in the eastern part of the Euphrates were in direct combat operations against the American presence in the eastern part of the Euphrates, to a point that the Americans had to bomb them, had to actually take their F-16s and bomb them. And they had to push the Kurds in the eastern part of the Euphrates and the northern part of Syria to engage with these tribes, to try and create some sort of a schism between a Syrian group and another Syrian group. But that also failed. Now we are seeing new polls from Daraa coming again. Daraa is the main region which ignited the global war against Syria. We're seeing new statements that were issued like 4 days ago, saying that they are preparing to launch attacks on checkpoints of the Syrian Arab army and its allies across the southern part of the country. Who do you think is operating these people? Who do you think is arming them? Who do you think is supporting them? The same people that have been doing so for the past 13 years. If you just do a small research and say Nusra warriors, or what you call Syrian rebels and Israeli forces, you could see videos of them coordinating attacks, getting training, getting medical attention in hospitals inside occupied Palestinian territories under the control of the Zionist entity forces. So it is Israel again trying to create some sort of a if you will, something to just take the attention away from the Golan Heights, because they know if they get a third front open, it's the end for Zionist Israel. At the moment, they are looking into how they want to get themselves out of this conundrum that Netanyahu pushed them through by attacking Lebanon in this way and prompting Hezbollah to start bombing Tel Aviv, like you saw yesterday morning at 6 a.m. when they used the Qadr ballistic missile to target Tel Aviv. And we're talking about a missile that has a warhead that's over 500 kilograms of warhead that's 500 kilograms of TNT, of explosives. So you can imagine what that can do to a building, to a security intelligence arena that Hezbollah in a statement said that it had targeted in Tel Aviv. So can you imagine if this kind of ballistic missiles start flying into Tel Aviv and other areas of occupied Palestine, also from the Syrian side, from the Golan Heights front? It would spell the end of Zionist Israel. So that's the main concern at the moment, which is why we're also seeing all these lies about having hundreds of thousands of Yemenis being imported into Syria and trained in order to enter in a ground invasion into Zionist Israel. They're not needed. Syria doesn't need, despite the fact that Yemenis would be very delighted to actually do that, but Syria doesn't. It has its own national defense forces. It has its own Syrian Arab army, but even the Syrian Arab army doesn't need to open that front. It's enough for the resistance factions inside of Syria to open that front, and this is what really scares the Zionist entity. And you also have the front that the United States of America is trying to take care of, but is failing miserably to take care of, is the Iraqi front. Iraq has been doing an excellent job over the past week in trying to support the Lebanese resistance by targeting not only Elad, but also Haifa. And we've seen how the swarms of drones that were sent from Iraq were actually reaching their targets without being stopped. And Jordan did try to intercept them at one point, because there's no shame whatsoever in Jordan left, not even an ounce of dignity. But still, the drones were able to bypass these air defenses and reach their targets and create this new kind of fear within the settler colonial community. They don't know whether the drone is coming from Yemen, is it coming from the Mediterranean, is it a ballistic missile from Hezbollah, is it also, because we stopped talking about the missiles that are also flying from Gaza into the kibbutz area in the Gaza envelope. They're still firing rockets a year after the genocide began. This is the worst case scenario for Zionist Israel, and Netanyahu is adamant on taking them head first into the nearest wall. And look, whatever the price is, I mean, human-wise, with the damage that's going to be caused by the genocidal war machine of Zionist Israel, whatever the cost, we have Algeria that paid 1.5 million for its liberation. So I truly believe that whatever the number, even if it includes me and my family, it's still not enough to secure that liberation. If it only stops at, I don't know, like something similar to what Gaza went through to get that liberation, trust me, if you go down to the street and ask the Lebanese people, they say that they are ready to pay that price. Because khalas, it's no longer going back to what things were prior October 7. Khalas. It's either them or us. And according to our ideology as natives, you know, the olives on my tree in Khiyam, they are way more worth than all the lives of the colonial settlers in Zionist Israel. Eat just one olive on my tree. And I'm getting there. And I'm picking my olives this year, even if it's going to cost me my life.
And you know, it's really important that we get this perspective from people on the ground in Lebanon, especially in South Lebanon, who've been completely demonized by Western media as agents of Iran, right? But you know what Israel has done? It has shot itself in the foot with this war against Gaza. It has shot itself in the foot with this war against Lebanon. It's actually exposing itself, its barbarity, to the world for people who may have, you know, maybe were confused, maybe Israel because of, you know, religious, whatever reasons. It's like now people are seeing the fact that, you know, Israel is a barbaric colony state. It's engaging in apartheid. It's engaging in genocide, and it's completely out of control. Americans are tired of allowing our tax money to pay for this out of control settler state, and people are taking to the world. You know, they're standing in solidarity with Palestine and with Lebanon now. I'm actually speaking at a protest in a couple of hours after I pick up my son from school. You know, there's protests being announced all over the country here in the United States. We have Netanyahu today speaking at the UN, which is being at the UN headquarters in New York. And so there's a lot of organizing against, you know, Israel's war in Gaza and now in Lebanon. But it seems like Western powers, you know, despite them giving us kind of, you know, this lip service and these, you know, hollow words of, you know, we're, you know, concerned about civilians being targeted. In the end, the United States and Great Britain are handing Israel the very bombs and the diplomatic, and they're providing Israel with the diplomatic immunity to commit these war crimes. And so it really, you know, I'm glad to have you here today to talk about this issue from the Lebanese perspective, because the word resistance has really lost a lot of its meaning in America, you know, in Western circles. The word resistance has been turned against us. We're not even allowed to talk about resistance to occupation. We're not allowed to talk about resistance to war. You know, what Marwa just described, and, you know, you could tell that, you know, all of her words were coming from her heart, because she has been somebody who has lived in the South, who's been a victim of Israeli occupation. And, you know, Marwa, I mean, I'm a survivor myself of Israeli occupation and apartheid. I sat on the rooftop of my home and watched Israeli jets drop bombs on homes in Ramallah. And so the things that we have seen as survivors cannot be unseen. And so we are, you know, the kind of conversation that we're having here, by the way, on this live stream is the kind of conversation, unfortunately, would get us censored. Right? We could be jeopardizing right now our entire channel because of the things that we said today. And using this platform to speak about what does resistance actually mean, because right now Hezbollah is labeled as a terrorist organization by the United States. Hamas is labeled as a terrorist organization by the United States. Ansar Allah has been designated as a terrorist organization. I can't remember if they removed them or not. But
Everyone.
Everyone
is a terrorist except the terrorists themselves.
Exactly. And that was the point that I was trying to make, is like, in the end, it's like the people that are actually resisting real terrorism are labeled as the terrorists. It just brings me back to post 9/11 world that we were living in when, you know, people across the Muslim world were deemed as terrorists. They were portrayed and painted with this one stroke of a brush of civilization of jihad. But times are changing. I mean, despite the media attempting to do that, I think this time around, when it comes to the war in Palestine, it's completely backfiring. People are seeing a genocide being live streamed on their phones. Of course, that's, you know, soon I think we'll start to see more censorship, more than what we're already seeing, because of that, because, you know, people's hearts and minds have been changed by the genocide in Gaza. And you know, they're questioning here. I mean, I can only speak for Americans as an American, but like people are questioning here in America, like why our taxes are paying for these wars. You know, it's ridiculous. And so I just want to, I also want to talk about Hassan Nasrallah. Marwa, if you can, give us a little bit more information on who Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is. I think we should have talked about this from the very beginning, but who is Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah? Who is Israel facing right now in terms of the leadership of Hezbollah? And what is his strategy in dealing with Israel's war?
He's the man who's going to liberate Palestine. That's who Hassan Nasrallah is. Said Hassan Nasrallah is the Secretary General of the Lebanese Islamic Resistance. He came to be as Secretary General after Zionist Israel assassinated the first Secretary General, Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, while he was in the funeral of Sheikh Raghib Harb, who was also assassinated by Zionist Israel. When Israel when they assassinated Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, they thought that this was the end of Hezbollah, and that was 1992. And everyone else in Lebanon were devastated because that man was not like no other. And you need to watch documentaries and learn and listen to him speak to understand what I mean. Because he was the man that brought Hezbollah out of the sectarian bickering inside of Lebanon and into the real struggle against Zionist Israel for liberation. And that man has many speeches that needs to be heard, Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, by the public to understand the essence and core values of Hezbollah. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was a 30-year-old man when he was elected by the council by the Shura Council of Hezbollah to become the Secretary General. And everyone was asking, who's this 30-year-old man who's going to take control of this resistance in Lebanon, who's supposedly fighting off Israel? There's no way that he can make it. And within months, this leader had the qualities of a commander in his blood, to a point that within 4 years, he was able to bring up the resistance capabilities with the help of his friends in Syria and Iran to unprecedented levels, which basically pushed Zionist Israel into committing massacres and genocide in 1996. And that's when I stopped being a kid. I keep talking about this because I was 8 years old when this happened, and it was the first ever bullet that I've heard. We were on vacation in Lebanon, and it happened in April 1996, and I saw the first body in my life on live TV, which was a 7-month-old baby without a head being pulled from under the rubble in Qana, in the Qana massacre, and he had his small little pacifier hanging from his wardrobe, and for me that was horrifying. And Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah took the resistance after 1996 and the horrors that we saw into unprecedented levels of professionalism and made it the only power in the Arab world, in the history of the struggle, in the Arab-Israeli struggle, to liberate land in the year 2000. That's 4 years after 1996. So in 1 decade after Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah took over the leadership of Hezbollah, he was able to liberate all of the northern part of the Litani River from the hands of the fascist Nazis of Zionist Israel, with the pure blood that was spilled by the natives in Lebanon. People start asking, who is Hezbollah? Hezbollah is the teacher. Hezbollah is the carpenter. Hezbollah is the person who changes your tires. Hezbollah is the nurse. Hezbollah is the doctor. Hezbollah is the teachers. Hezbollah is the female and male teachers. Hezbollah is the female and male associate professors. Hezbollah is the female and male engineers. You name it. It is the community that said, we want a second job. We want to be resistance fighters. This is who Hezbollah is. This is who Hezbollah is. And with that effort, Hezbollah was able to garner so much strength that in 2006, with the surveillance that they had and with the intel that they had, they knew that in August, Israel was preparing for a full-scale war on Lebanon. So they initiated the kidnapping of the two soldiers in order to ensure that they have something to swap with our detainees in the Israeli entity detention centers. And that's exactly what happened in the 2006 war. And Lebanon came out victorious out of it. And we saw at least 2,000, at that time, 2,033 days, martyrs falling. That's exclusive from the number of martyrs that fell for Hezbollah. We're talking about 2,000 civilians here and more than 5,000 injured across Lebanon. Obviously, the complete destruction, the utter destruction of the southern suburbs of Beirut and swaths of land in Beqa and southern Lebanon. We came back, we rebuilt. We are now one of the most powerful non-government resistances on the planet. And when I say we, it's community and resistance. I am not part of Hezbollah. I don't have a paper that says I'm part of Hezbollah, but I'm part of the support community, the environment that supports Hezbollah, because why wouldn't I support them when they liberated my land, gave blood and sacrifice, and allowed me to be free in my own land, buy land, build a house, raise my children in my land until Zionist Israel decided to start a genocide against the people of Gaza and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah stood up. The very first man, it was October 8th. I was in my house. It was 6:45 a.m. and we started hearing the bombardments of the resistance against Zionist Israel. Yes, we started the first shot and we are proud of it. Zionists keep telling us, you started it. Babe, you came here in 1936. We're just taking our land back. This is what we're doing. And we're doing it in the leadership of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. May God protect him. May he show us and lead us the way into a liberated Al-Quds, inshallah, and the liberated Palestine. This is the man who said no to imperialism, no to colonialism, who said no to imperial powers creating havoc and wreaking havoc in Syria, because Syria is the backbone of the resistance. He said no to the killing machine on Gaza. He said no to the Saudi killing machine on Yemen. He is the only Arab who had the dignity and the faith to say no to all of these imperial powers at the time when the strongest, most powerful economically in the Arab world just became pawns in the hands of the empire.
Batool, before we wrap up, did you want to add any final words?
Yes, just one quick thing with regards to the question, Mnar, that you asked about the resistance, I guess, strategy. The resistance strategy is that it has quite a cold mind and it's not hot-tempered, as some people would expect. And a lot of the times when people see the extent of the civilian death and destruction, they kind of expect or out of emotion, they say, why isn't the resistance striking harder inside the Israeli occupation entity? But what they fail to realize is that the whole strategy of the resistance axis is within the realms of wisdom. It takes decisions, therefore, calmly and not based on any kind of emotional reactionism. That's exactly how it operates. Of course, we get emotional when we see effects on the ground, but when taking decisions, it's very important that it requires emotions to be on the side. So this is just to reiterate, as Marwa was saying, in the essence of what she's saying, is that the resistance is very strong and powerful because it has accumulated all of that experience on the ground for all of these decades throughout different leaderships that have existed, despite the many successful assassinations that have occurred across the military leadership. The resistance on the ground knows what it is doing. It was nothing 40 years ago. In 1982, when the Israeli occupation entity decided to invade Lebanon, Abbas al-Musawi was, hiding from car to car, for his safety until the Israelis decided to bomb him from the sky, essentially, and they could locate his whereabouts. It was nothing 40 years ago, but 11 months in to this war, it has paralyzed the entire north of the Israeli occupation entity. So this is a long struggle, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to us when we see the level of destruction that the occupation entity is capable of, because it reigns supreme when it comes to high tech and weapons of mass destruction. It reigns supreme when it comes to high intelligence and precision striking. So don't be surprised if they're able to take out, resistance leaders in areas like Dahia. They're professionals at that because they have their collaborator networks. Mossad is probably the strongest and the most powerful intel in the world, because the Israeli occupation entity cannot survive without strong intel. It's predicated on having strong intelligence. But we cannot expect, therefore, the resistance to have the same capabilities as America and the Israeli occupation entity when it comes to that side of things. The resistance has its style, it has its strength in warfare. It's keeping its pressure high to prevent Israel from achieving its goals. Meanwhile, with time, it is increasing its capabilities. So that's on the practical side.
Well, and Batool, really quickly, just because this context is really important. I think Israel, like you said, and its Mossad are really good at showing how strong they are on the international stage. But in with the assassination, for example, of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, but those assassinations that they conduct are more of like a PR thing on an international stage, when in reality, like you said, like on the ground, they actually don't have the capabilities of defeating like the entire of South Lebanon. But sorry, exactly. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, go ahead.
100%, absolutely. It's what it's capable of doing is dropping bombs from the sky, absolutely, because it has the high tech. It has all the weapons of mass destruction in the world. Exactly as you say, it's unable to fight on the ground. If it was able to locate Yahya Sinwar, for example, in Gaza, if it was able to locate Mohammed Daf, from the military side of the Gazan resistance, you could say that that is a strategic point of success for them. But they're unable to. They're able to take out Haniyeh, exactly as you said, in Tehran. They're able to take out Aruri and Dahia because these are open areas, and it's not difficult for them to know where they are. And so because there's the capabilities of the resistance on the ground, which is making it strong, but also the very important aspect that we've been discussing across this podcast, which is the morale that's undefeated, which means that Israel can never achieve their goals. It's enough for us to see today that the United States of America has to deploy its USS Truman, for example, its warships into the region to protect the Israeli occupation entity.
Which have failed so far, Batool, which we saw the Houthis basically dropping ballistic missiles on and making them incapable of protecting the Zionist entity.
Exactly. But the point is over here that you see the strength of the resistance capabilities when you see that America has to bring all of its warships to the region just to anticipate the Iranian strike. This tells you how strong the Iranian deterrence is, that they've been standing on one leg, on one knee, so to speak, for a whole month, anticipating, when is Iran going to respond? When is Iran going to strike? Since the end of July when Haniyeh was assassinated until I think it was like September the 7th or 8th, when America told the Israeli occupation entity, we've been here for too long. We've been on standby. This is costing us too much, So we need to have that sense of awareness that many targets are within the resistance's abilities. It doesn't show all its cards in one go. The Israeli occupation entity is the type to, on the first day, kill 500. To commit the worst kinds of gross, heinous massacres because its war is a war of fighting and seeking to defeat the morale of the people because it is unable to do anything on the ground. So that's the crux of it.
Thank you both for joining me today. I mean, I'm just so impressed by both of you, Lebanese women. Batool, I'm glad that you're safe. You are based in the UK right now. Marwa, our heart goes out to you and your family. We are praying for your safety and the safety of all of the Lebanese people. And I'm just so inspired and in awe of your strength and your courage and your resilience. And may we learn from you what resistance.
Trust me,
like.
it's just trust in the resistance. That's what it is, and it's trust in Allah Subhanahu wa Taala that whatever Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has in for us in the future, we're okay. نحن راضون. We are okay. We are satisfied with whatever end for this struggle comes. We are satisfied because we know we are going to be victorious, whether in this life or in the hereafter, inshallah.
And those are very strong words. I mean, it's hard for people that are American or live in the West who are, living in a consumer society and a capitalist society to understand that kind of concept, because we are just being fed with so much propaganda and things to keep us satisfied. Whereas the people who have lived under war have seen that, what life is like with their water cut off, with their land being taken away. They've been able to live with so little and
Yeah.
realize that this world is really nothing. It's better to live with honor
It is.
and humility than it is
It
to
is, and I
live
think
with
Gaza has brought us back home
yeah.
over the past year. And when I say home, back home to the real faith by their resilience and their unimaginable spirit and faith in the face of this genocidal war machine. So we learn, and we now are learning firsthand right here with the bombs that are falling. And we couldn't be happier that we are sharing these moments with Gaza, despite the sorrow and the pain, because at the end of the day, what is this life really, Mnar? It's just a speck. It's nothing. You need to understand that it's nothing in order to accept the loss and then move on dignified, happy with what you have achieved so far, and hopeful that your descendants, your kids will, inshallah, in the future, make way for greater victorious objectives and victorious times and eras, inshallah.
And it's conversations like these that remind us, why the West is so afraid of Muslim women who are resisting occupation. I mean, both of you have spoken so eloquently about the history of Lebanon and Palestine. And it's really been an honor to hear and listen from both of you. I look up to both of you. So thank you, ladies, so much.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. And we are going to wrap up this podcast. For everybody who's watching, thank you so much for being here. We're going to continue to do more live streams as the crisis in Lebanon develops, and hopefully we can see an end to this violence. But thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.